When life gives you lemons, you shouldn't be in business, because if you stubbornly insist, you'll end up like this guy. Besides his handsome face, he was selling e-sack, which means his shop was extremely unpopular. Daily, customers kept coming in and out, but they were mostly students just taking pictures with the handsome guy for clout and keeping up with their peers. Occasionally, they'd buy something, but only if it was free or buy one get one free. Food kept expiring, and he barely got any sleep. D. Hine had been up for 36 hours straight dealing with his struggling shop. So, he decided that even though he had no money for food, he still had to hire an employee. After a day of posting a recruitment notice, D. Hine was dozing off in the evening when a beautiful, flower-like girl appeared, applying for the job. Her name was Seat Bile. Heaven had blessed her with a gorgeous face and a perfect figure, but her personality was wild and strong. When confronted by a group of unruly students blocking her way, she was unfazed, fearlessly charging at them, sending each of them flying. They tried to restrain her, but once Seat Bile unleashed her power, they were sent flying a second time. However, when she was around the convenience store owner, she was surprisingly gentle, because she had a crush on him from 3 years ago. That day, she had just returned from a fight with her friends and needed a cigarette. She saw D. Hine sadly throwing gifts into the trash because his crush had rejected him. Suddenly, she found him so cute, so she stopped him to ask him to buy her 3 packs of menthol cigarettes. He actually bought them, but they were menthol candies. He advised her that young people should live positively and enjoy life in a civilized way. Just because of that advice, Seat Bile decided to quit smoking. Before he left, she took the initiative, flying in front of him, landing, and giving him a kiss that has haunted D. Hine ever since. When receiving Seat Bile's resume, he couldn't look at her directly, telling himself that he absolutely had to reject this rebellious girl. But after drinking a cup of herbal tea that she offered, he fell into a deep sleep, snoring away without even realizing it. When he woke up, he was shocked to see that his shop, which was usually deserted, was now packed with customers. Seat Bile was already dressed in uniform, declaring that she had chosen this store and that she would work here, whether the owner agreed or not. If he didn't, she would cry because tears are a girl's weapon. So, despite his fear, D. Hine had to agree to hire Seat Bile as a trainee. That night, Seat Bile was attracting customers and even flirting with the male lead's mother. She liked this employee so much. Meanwhile, D. Hine seemed to have his head in the clouds, looking at the beautiful girl in front of him, but internally criticizing her. What kind of boss is he, lurking in the shadows, finding fault with his employee, waiting for her to make a single mistake to fire her immediately? That day, when Seat Bile left, D. Hine kindly reminded her to be careful not to drop any money from her pocket. After checking the cash drawer, he realized that he was the one who had lost a few large bills. He immediately suspected Seat Bile. When checking the security camera, he couldn't see anything because she was standing at an angle. He called her, but she didn't answer. However, instead of reporting to the police, he chose to go online and watch videos about employees stealing from stores, imagining Seat Bile as a super thief with many years of experience. He reviewed her resume, found her address, and rushed to her house. He stood in front of the door for a long time, battling his emotions. Finally, he made up his mind and rang the doorbell. Suddenly, 2 undercover agents rushed out, dragged him inside and restrained him, because this was a brothel, and they were waiting to arrest the perverted clients. Luckily, he had brought Seat Bile's employment contract with him, so the police believed that he had been tricked by his employee and released him to continue his search. D. Hine raced back to his store, but the door was locked shut by someone. Looking inside, he saw that the cigarette shelves were completely empty, giving him his second shock of the day. He frantically ran to his dad's place to get the key, but when he returned, the store door was already open. Seat Bile was inside, greeting her boss with a cheerful smile. The cigarette display was neatly arranged, and the money in the till had mysteriously returned to its place. D. Hine was able to breathe a sigh of relief. He sat down, had a free milk, and then continued to fantasize about how Seat Bile had tried to steal money and he would have to fire her quickly. While she was deep in thought, the police officer from before came looking for him to help resolve the theft case. Upon closer inspection, they realized that Seat Bile's apartment was 1006, while the other one was 1000. From what the police said, Seat Bile was deeply hurt. Seat Bile explained to him that his mother had asked her to take the money for her, then cheerfully said that she was used to being misunderstood, so they didn't need to continue discussing it. This made D. Hein feel even more guilty. He wanted to follow her, but Seat Bile gave him a strong and scary kick, scaring him off. Despite this, Seat Bile went home that night feeling sad and confided in her younger sister, advising her not to hang out with the unruly kids because they are easily misunderstood by others. Despite being hurt, Seat Bile came to work on time the next evening. D. Hein tried to make amends with a beef dish, but she rejected it. However, after he actively waved his arms and legs, ran errands, and did everything for his employee to play games, she finally forgave him. Just when it seemed like there would be a beautiful romance between them, D. Hein had another girlfriend. With his cluelessness, the girlfriend turned out to be a seductive female department head. Today, when D. Hein went to pick her up from work, she invited him to a hotel for a date night with her. So, that evening, he waited hopefully for Seat Bile at the shop. She had just arrived and caught the strong scent of his perfume, assuming that he was trying to attract her attention, which made her very happy. But her smile faded when he told her that he was about to go on a date with his girlfriend. Seat Bile declared that she would make him fall for her more than his girlfriend. D. Hein thought she was just joking. He went to the hotel, but to his surprise, Yeonju's date was actually a gym session because she thought he looked weak and tired lately. While they were working out, his best friend called him, snitching. Seat Bile is causing trouble at the shop, calling for you to come back. So, D. Hein had to apologize to his girlfriend and leave to go back to the shop first. He then rushed back to his store. The staff complained that even with the boss present, the freeloaders were still not afraid. They even tried to force him to drink with them, thinking he was easygoing. And so it was. Just a few minutes later, he was also drunk, and she had to carry him to the storage room to sleep. Hearing him constantly calling his girlfriend's name, she felt both heartbroken and angry, giving him a few punches. Oh my god, he actually fell on the floor. The next morning, seeing his nose bleeding, he thought he had sleepwalked and fallen. D. Hein's entanglement with Seat Bile wasn't small, because the next day, he was questioned by the police for selling cigarettes to a minor. He couldn't really be blamed though, given the kid's appearance and the college shirt. He clearly looked like a university student. But when the kid was questioned about the jacket, he denied everything and pinned the blame on D. Hein, causing him to be taken to the police station. If he couldn't prove his innocence, his store would be suspended for 2 months. However, when he went back to look at the security footage, he couldn't find it no matter how hard he tried. Even D. Hein and Seat Bile had to mobilize their best friends to take turns helping, but their friends didn't get along. They barely exchanged a few words before getting into a full-blown fight to avenge their bosses. Seat Bile went after the kid and warned him not to scam convenience stores anymore, and he also had to quit smoking. If he didn't, her kick wouldn't just be a threat, but would land directly on his face. The frightened kid confessed to the date he had gone to the store. Seat Bile happily ran back to tell D. Hein this information, which helped them find the video of the kid wearing the college jacket and prove that D. Hein was the one who was scammed, saving the store from a 2-month suspension. D. Hein carefully put a band-aid on Seat Bile's hand wound to thank her for her efforts. He promoted her to manager, which made her as happy as if her mom had given her a treat. The joy of being noticed by the boss was that simple. Watching the video of D. Hein acting crazy, Seat Bile laughed contentedly and unconsciously imitated him, showing how much she liked him. D. Hein, checking the camera footage at home, couldn't help but laugh at the senseless actions of his little employee. She may act cute and bubbly, but when her temper flares, even volcanoes have to bow down. However, these thugs didn't know that, and they deliberately entered the store to harass the pretty employee, taking advantage of their numbers to blindside the female employee to steal. Seat Bile had been annoyed by them since they first entered the store. They didn't clean up after themselves, and now they were planning to steal. She asked her best friend to watch the store while she fearlessly followed the group of young men to a secluded area. Seeing this, they smirked, thinking they were about to have an easy target. Little did they know, they had met their match. One punch to the nose resulted in a bloody mess. The one who started it still wanted to argue, so she took his shoes, slapped him once for his dad, once for his mom, and a final one for the store's merchandise. The second one charged, But his fate wasn't any better, getting a beat down by the beauty's long legs that sent him reeling. The red-shirted guy, all bark and no bite, showed off a few moves, but then Seat Bile slapped him awake a second time, leaving him dazed. She added a kick for good measure. Dan Zich, who was watching on the sidelines and constantly teased Seat Bile, was now too intimidated to move and made a quiet escape. The three tall men, who were so arrogant at first, were now kneeling on the ground within minutes, raising their hands in surrender. Seat Bile noticed that Dan Zich had been filming her and calmly approached him, asking if he had seen anything and whether he was going to tell D. Hein. Dan Zich, knowing his place, responded, "I didn't see a thing, sis. My eyes automatically go blind at night, and my ears go deaf too. You don't have to worry." "Oh, is that so? Alright then, let's shake on it. Just keep your mouth shut." The next day, D. Hein was eating with his girlfriend, and coincidentally, Seat Bile and her friend were also dining at the same restaurant. Yeonju needed to use the restroom, but she was blocked by a group of unruly students. Without thinking, she pushed them aside to continue, not expecting that this would make the leader hold a grudge. They followed her into the restroom and demanded compensation of 1 million won, shocking Yeonju. She tried to call the police, but the leader slapped her phone away. At the same time, Seat Bile needed to use the restroom but was blocked by the blonde girl. Because inside, the leader and her gang were extorting money, and they clearly hadn't heard about the past of Seat Bile. They soon saw that the blonde girl was kicked flying into the restroom. The red-haired leader, though intimidated, still stood up to demand justice for her underlings. Yeonju tried to run, but the leader grabbed her shirt and shoved her into the restroom. She picked up her phone and called her boyfriend, D. Hein, for help, knowing that her love was being bullied, and he rushed over. There, Seat Bile was giving the clueless kid a beatdown. When D. Hein arrived, not knowing anything, he thought Seat Bile was harming his girlfriend, so he pushed her away. Now, she realized that this was her crush's girlfriend. D. Hein misunderstood and thought that Seat Bile was causing trouble for no reason. She looked at Yeonju, hoping for an explanation, but Yeonju ignored her, saying she didn't know anything. "Well then, because I saved you, I got hit. Hey, are you threatening someone? Is this who you really are? You're really disappointing." He didn't even listen to her explanation and helped his girlfriend out. Yeonju was clearly saved by Seat Bile, but knowing she was D. Hein's employee, she didn't bother to explain to help her out. She wanted him to misunderstand and fire Seat Bile. Seat Bile had no choice but to return to her two friends, drinking until she was wasted. Though she laughed loudly on the outside, she was really heartbroken inside. She had been wronged, and she was misunderstood by the person she loved. Her two friends couldn't stand it, so the next morning, they went to find D. Hein to scold him. "Are you blind? It's clear that your girlfriend was the one who lied, but you blamed Seat Bile." D. Hein was scolded and couldn't argue back, but he was still in denial, not believing that his girlfriend was such an ungrateful person. However, it did at least affect his thinking somewhat. That evening, he went to pick up his girlfriend from the gym. On the way home, he asked her, "Why were there so many people on the floor in the restroom, but you weren't hurt? Was it because Seat Bile beat up the bullies to save you, Yeonju?" At first, she avoided the question, but under D. Hein's questioning, she had to admit the truth, but still complained that Seat Bile was a violent person and deserved to be fired. D. Hein didn't want to make his girlfriend sad, nor did he want to fire Seat Bile without a good reason. He had experienced workplace pressure and the oppression of his superiors, so now he didn't want to abuse his power unjustly with his own employees. He asked his girlfriend to think carefully about whether they should fire Seat Bile or not. Yeonju smiled just at this, allowing D. Hein to hug her. This scene was unintentionally seen by her mother. D. Hein panicked and hid in a corner. Suddenly, he received a call from the police, so he rushed to the station. Seat Bile was arrested for assaulting a customer. She said she only acted in self-defense when he had tried to sexually harass her. After hearing this, D. Hein immediately understood the situation. Initially, he wanted to apologize to make the situation go away, but the more he gave in, the more the man took advantage, forcing him to raise his voice and demand justice for Seat Bile. With clear evidence, the man panicked and stammered an apology. D. Hein said, "The one who needs to be apologized to is the woman he harassed." The man completely knelt down, begging for Seat Bile's forgiveness. After this incident, Dehan coldly pulled her away. He acted cool, but after 3 seconds he had to go back to get his phone because he had forgotten it outside. He apologized on behalf of his girlfriend for misunderstanding her the day before. Seat Bile said that she didn't mind, because she was used to being misunderstood, but Dehan stated that from now on, as long as she explained clearly, he would believe her. This deeply moved her. But just 3 seconds later, he switched back to his old man tone, scolding her for not fighting people indiscriminately. The 3 thugs already apologized to me earlier, but from now on, if anything happens, you need to call the police. Seat Bile tried to hold back. She had already let it go, but Dehan kept nagging, making her annoyed. She had to turn around and kick him, sending him flying 8 meters into the air, and he landed so hard he almost broke his spine. The truth is, it had been a long time since anyone had scolded Seat Bile, and Dehan's scolding reminded her of her father. She knew that people only use such harsh words when they truly care about someone. Thanks to Seat Bile, the store's revenue increased to unprecedented levels. She was also ranked as the highest performing employee in the system, becoming a treasure in the eyes of her boss, Dehan, who had to give her flowers to keep her around for the long haul. Though she was overjoyed, Seat Bile still said that it wasn't enough to retain an outstanding employee like her and that he needed to carry her around like a queen. He agreed, just waiting for that. Seat Bile immediately jumped onto Dehan's back. Unfortunately, Yeonju witnessed this scene. Seat Bile, knowing her place, immediately jumped down. Dehan awkwardly explained that they were just celebrating reaching the target sales for the store. Yeonju, though furious, still tried to handle the jealousy in a sophisticated way. She wanted to have dinner with her boyfriend, but she also invited Seat Bile to put her in her place. Seat Bile tried to refuse, and Dehan also said that if she went, there would be no one to watch the store, so his best friend stepped in. Thus, Seat Bile was forced to eat with the couple she disliked. Yeonju deliberately led them to the most luxurious restaurant, looking at the sky-high prices on the menu and dishes she had never heard of. She could only force a smile. Dehan also felt awkward, not knowing what to order. Clearly, Yeonju not only wanted to embarrass Seat Bile, but also wanted to show off her status in front of her boyfriend. Ironically, this only made him look worse. Seat Bile ate heartily, spoke loudly, and downed wine. She finished a glass in one gulp, and ate large slabs of beef, while Yeonju ate delicately in small bites. The 2 completely opposite women looked at each other, sparking tension, while the oblivious Dehan was still clueless about what was happening. He was carefree, honest, and uncalculating, which unintentionally suited Seat Bile better than his snobbish girlfriend. At the end of the meal, as they were heading back, Dehan received a call from a delivery person. Noticing a mistake in the order, he spoke loudly to make his point. This made Yeonju feel embarrassed because this was a fancy place. She tried to distance herself a bit, hiding her face, while only Seat Bile stayed to sort things out with Dehan. The manager appeared, dressed elegantly. Yeonju immediately stood next to him. She even intentionally agreed to go home in his car, making Dehan feel hurt. He could only blame himself for not having anything, and not blame her. The only one willing to run to catch the last bus with him was Seat Bile. The next day, when he found out that her best friend was the famous actor Jay Cope, Dehan thought she was delusional. But when Jay Cope risked coming to the convenience store to meet Seat Bile, Dehan was completely shocked. He was a die-hard fan of his. Yet Seat Bile made his idol help her with deliveries, which was simply too much. Dehan even enthusiastically invited him to eat and drink with his family. Because his was the leading convenience store in sales, Dehan was interviewed by someone from the GS25 head office. But when they published the article, they cut out his family's picture, leaving only a picture of him and Seat Bile, and they called him to inform him that they would be using this picture as the profile picture for GS25 in the near future. This made Dehan want to cry. How would he explain this to his girlfriend? Seat Bile, on the other hand, was disappointed and saddened by Dehan's attitude. He skipped the party and raced to Yeonju's house to explain, but saw her with the manager. Everyone had always said that she was better suited with someone successful like the manager rather than a mere shopkeeper like him. So, Dehan didn't dare go up to win his girlfriend back. Seeing Yeonju being carried on the manager's back, D. Hein felt small, insignificant, and pathetic. Meanwhile, at the store, Seat Bile was cleaning up alone when she was approached from behind by an unknown assailant. It turned out that they were the same 3 unruly kids whom Seat Bile had taught a lesson the other day. Seeing her unconscious on the ground, they panicked and ran away. Luckily, D. Hein rushed back in time and took her to the hospital. But strangely, even though Seat Bile was hit in the head, her head was completely fine. She only had a slight stomachache because of appendicitis. D. Hein had to call his mother to take care of Seat Bile so that he could go to the police station to report the assault. In the evening, he stayed by her side in the hospital. In the middle of the night, when a storm raged, she woke up and demanded that he carry her to the bathroom. When D. Hein refused, she suddenly jumped onto his back, and no matter how much he struggled, he couldn't get her off. Just then, Yeonju appeared. Only then did Seat Bile finally get down. His girlfriend didn't forgive him. She pulled out a gun without hesitation and shot D. Hein straight in the chest, killing him. His soul left his body, and no matter how much he called out, he couldn't come back. Suddenly, D. Hein woke up, realizing that it was all just a nightmare. Poor guy, he's so foolish, but hey, he's very responsible towards his employees. Since Seat Bile was hospitalized, he gave her paid leave, which made her happy and promised to recover fully to return to the race soon. Hearing the news, her 2 friends rushed to the hospital. One of them was already crying like a baby and demanded to split her belongings. Poor D. Hein. In the evening, when he went to pick up his girlfriend from work, she clearly saw him but chose to go straight into another guy's car. This was nothing less than a slap in the face for a man. D. Hein, heartbroken, went to drink alone. Afterward, he went to the hospital, stood in front of Seat Bile's bed, and with difficulty said the words, "I'm firing you." He knew it was unreasonable, but he couldn't upset his girlfriend. Suddenly, a woman sprang up, startling him. It turned out that she had changed rooms and had been upgraded to a VIP room by her friend. But looking at Seat Bile's innocent face, D. Hein suddenly didn't know how to bring it up, so he just said that they would deal with it when she was discharged. All in all, Seat Bile was the luckiest one. She was in the hospital, enjoying a VIP room sponsored by her best friend, and had a celebrity visit her in the early morning. Everything about D. Hein seemed to fit Seat Bile, and not Yeonju. She and he were on 2 completely opposite levels. Yeonju's mother, upon learning her daughter was dating the manager of one of their franchise stores, deliberately humiliated him. She summoned him for a delivery, then proceeded to offer him a wad of cash as a tip right in front of D. Hein and Yeonju. Mortified, but pressured by the customer, he accepted the money and quickly left. Yeonju, furious with her mother's intentional slight, could do nothing. Now unable to contact D. Hein, he was left adrift and humiliated. The greatest insult to a man is being reduced to. Meanwhile, Yeonju rushed to the hospital to see Seat Bile. Seat Bile, unreasonably, fired her, leaving Yeonju speechless. Suddenly, a male friend of Seat Bile's appeared, interrupting the conversation and smoothly dismissing Yeonju. He then volunteered to act as Seat Bile's water boy, accompanying her to a movie, all to bring a smile to her face. Seat Bile also had the support of her younger sister, Mina. Previously, Mina had been forced by a trio of bullies to audition for a singing career, so she could earn money for them. Mina had endured their torment, but learning they were responsible for putting her sister in the hospital, she exploded. She punched the redhead squarely in the face, then sent her flying with a powerful kick. Outnumbered, Mina took a hit from the blue-haired bully. Seat Bile's friend arrived, taking down the bully's 3 bodyguards, but their true leader appeared. The 3 girls, intimidated by her presence, backed down despite their boyfriend being present. The bodyguards, having not yet experienced her legendary punch and 100-meter kick, remained cocky. 2 of them attacked with a Mantis-style kung fu, which she countered with some Mantis-style tai chi, effectively breaking their claws. The last one, not learning his lesson, tried some fancy kicks, but was swiftly taken down. As usual, they learned the hard way not to underestimate women, especially pretty ones. Seeing their beaten boyfriend flee, the girls quickly retreated. This round was a complete victory for the Seat Bile sisters. Back at the hospital, Seat Bile found D. Hein waiting for her in her room. Before he could speak, she asked if he still thought she was a bad person, like he did when they first met. Taken aback, he stammered a no. Relieved, Seat Bile, not wanting to be the reason for the demise of his relationship, offered to quit her job at the convenience store. Ironically, he had wanted her to quit, but hearing her offer, he felt conflicted, apologizing profusely while lamenting his existing girlfriend. Upon returning home from the hospital, Seat Bile found her apartment being cleared out. She learned they had been tricked by a deceitful real estate agent. They had signed what they thought was a month-to-month lease, but it was actually a year-long contract. Devastated, they went to the police only to discover 30 other families had been similarly scammed. Such a complex case couldn't be resolved immediately, meaning they were effectively homeless. Fresh out of the hospital, jobless, and now homeless, with no food, things couldn't get any worse. The sisters had no choice but to ask to stay in their apartment temporarily until they found a new place. In a stroke of unbelievable luck, or perhaps a dream sequence, the agent, despite his actions, returned their deposit before fleeing to avoid arrest. Because in reality, what thief ever returns stolen money? That evening, Seat Bile needed to retrieve her diary from the convenience store. Not wanting to run into D. Hine, she waited until he left before slipping inside. He returned sooner than expected, forcing her to hide in the storeroom. Unfortunately, he entered the storeroom to retrieve some stock and, to add insult to injury, passed gas right where she was standing, nearly suffocating her. Talk about bad luck. As if hiding wasn't enough, a delivery driver arrived to pick up a wrongly delivered item. Seat Bile quickly hid in a locker since she had been the one to put it away mid-shift and D. Hine wouldn't know its location. The driver called Seat Bile. Thankfully her phone was on vibrate. Once they left, she quickly moved the box to a more visible location and hid again. Finally, D. Hine located the misplaced item and gave it to the driver. He lingered in the storeroom, lamenting Seat Bile's absence. He confessed his clumsiness and how vital she was to the store's smooth operation. Overhearing this, Seat Bile was so happy she accidentally made a noise, startling him. Thinking it was a ghost, he fled, allowing her to escape. That night, she and Mina had to stay at their friend Hyan Jai's place. Lately, Seat Bile had become engrossed in a new webtoon and developed an online relationship with the author, unaware he was the same disheveled guy she intensely disliked. Hyan Jai, unfazed by her friend's misfortunes, cuddled Seat Bile like it was a reunion after years apart. But sleep evaded Seat Bile as she tossed and turned, thinking about D. Hine. He, too, was unhappy at work, constantly pondering Seat Bile's sudden resignation and wondering if he had upset her. He texted her to meet, prompting Seat Bile to rush back to her old apartment. He returned her diary and a gift he'd intended to give her. A new, perfectly fitting safety vest celebrating her promotion to full-time employee. Seat Bile was filled with regret. To make ends meet, she took a delivery job, but faced constant disrespect. Back at Hyan Jai's, she overheard an argument between her friend and her father. He forbade Hyan Jai from associating with Seat Bile, blaming her for Hyan Jai's delayed graduation. Despite Seat Bile's efforts, in their eyes, a high school dropout remained a bad influence. Earning a living was proving difficult. That day, Seat Bile nearly had an accident, falling and scraping her elbows, ruining the delivered goods. The unsympathetic boss fired her on the spot. No one was as kind as D. Hine. He wasn't having an easy time either. His girlfriend had enthusiastically agreed to see a play with him, giving him hope. He made all the arrangements only to receive a last-minute cancellation call. Yeonju had to entertain an important international client with her boss. D. Hine gave the tickets to his father, hoping they'd appease his mother. Mr. Bong presented the tickets to his wife, washing her feet and showering her with affection, making her very happy. Seconds later, Mr. Bong revealed his true intentions, to use the tickets for a trip abroad with his friends. Broke and fantasizing about vacations, he earned a beating from his furious wife, who promptly returned the tickets to D. Hine. Left with unwanted tickets, he felt helpless. Meanwhile, Mina's singing talent landed her an idol trainee position. However, a guardian was needed to sign the contract. That night, the sisters slept at a public bathhouse. Mina tended to Seat Bile's wounds, promising a life of luxury once she became successful. Her unusual politeness and concern worried Seat Bile, who suspected something was amiss. Waking up, she found an apology note from Mina stuck to her face. Checking her stash of money, she discovered it was empty, leaving her weak with anger. Actually, Mina used the money to hire a fake mother to sign the trainee contract. She wasn't being malicious, just overly confident in her ability to repay her sister. Despite Seat Bile's frantic calls and texts, Mina avoided them. Broke, hungry, and with her sister unreachable, Seat Bile was despondent. Mrs. Bong, noticing her distress, approached her with a few kind words, and Seat Bile burst into tears, feeling the pang of maternal deprivation. Mrs. Bong shared a meal of eggs with her, treating her like family, and confided her own frustrations about her son, spending all his meager earnings on play tickets for his girlfriend, who then cancelled. Seat Bile could only manage a bittersweet smile. Meanwhile, D. Hein sat alone at the play, his heart heavy. He wasn't foolish enough to spend all his money on 2 expensive tickets. It was his and Yeonju's 1000th day anniversary, and he wanted to make it special. A few rows away, Yeonju sat with her client, pointedly ignoring him. One in the expensive seats, the other in the cheap seats, they seemed worlds apart. After the play, D. Hein trudged home to a dark, cold, and lonely house. Suddenly, a white figure appeared in the distance. The temperature plummeted, and D. Hein screamed. The figure approached, its face revealed. It was Seat Bile. Earlier, Mrs. Bong, learning about the sisters' predicament at the bathhouse, had gone back and invited Seat Bile to stay with them. D. Hein protested vehemently. "What's the point of arguing with Mom? Is there another room? Either she goes or I do." "Fine, get out of my sight," retorted his mother, gesturing Seat Bile towards a room. Seat Bile quickly went upstairs. Mrs. Bong turned off the lights and went to bed, leaving her dumbfounded son standing there. She banished him to sleep at the convenience store for a while. Mr. Bong, having extorted some cash from his son for his travel fund, happily returned home, only to encounter a white-clad ghost slowly advancing towards him. He fainted on the spot. A panicked Seat Bile called Mrs. Bong, who emerged, gave her husband a few more kicks, and went back to bed. A true picture of familial love. While her husband and son were constant sources of annoyance, Seat Bile had earned her affection and care. She even made Mr. Bong help clean his son's pigsty of a room for Seat Bile's comfort. As for D. Hein, this is the definition of lovesick. Despite the cancelled date, he relentlessly pursued tickets for the next showing of the play, determined to take Yeonju, simply because she had expressed her interest in it. While Yeonju loved him, she felt increasingly conflicted. That afternoon, D. Hein anxiously awaited his father to cover his shift at the store. He had to promise secrecy and payment towards his father's travel fund to secure his cooperation. D. Hein drove straight home to get ready. Forgetting Seat Bile was inside, he casually stripped down for a shower. At the same moment, she emerged from the bathroom. Both were startled, but D. Hein got the worst of it, falling flat on his back. He sent her home, leaving her feeling hurt and unwilling to share her troubles. That evening, Yeonju dutifully attended a play with D. Hein. Though she verbally expressed her enjoyment, her face betrayed a forced politeness. As the play ended, all Yeonju wanted was to go home. Unbeknownst to her, D. Hein, believing she admired the director, had enthusiastically secured tickets and even gotten the director's autograph for her. Yeonju, a strong, independent woman, disliked showing excessive enthusiasm for anyone. But D. Hein insisted on pulling her into the crowd for a photo with the director, leaving her to hide behind a face mask. Their director witnessed this scene. After the photo op, Yeonju, eager to escape, brushed off D. Hein's suggestions for a post-show date. Without giving him a chance to speak, she hailed a cab and left. D. Hein sighed, wondering what he had done wrong, or if perhaps he'd chosen seats too far from the stage. He was completely baffled. Yeonju, born with a silver spoon in her mouth, was successful and beautiful. She preferred mature, accomplished, and sophisticated men. D. Hein's perceived naivete and goofiness had gradually eroded her interest. Their relationship had entered a phase of boredom and disillusionment. This led Yeonju to seek solace with someone on her own level, their director. Without asking questions, he simply stroked her hair and said, "I'll put you back where you belong." They kissed, marking the definitive end of Yeonju's feelings for D. Hein. Meanwhile, a weary D. Hein returned to the store to learn from his sister that Seat Bile had been scammed out of her home by a crooked real estate agent nicknamed MacBook, forcing her to stay with their cousins. Suddenly, everything from earlier that day clicked into place. Remembering he'd seen MacBook sneaking back to the store for money, D. Hein rushed out. At the same time, Seat Bile arrived to retrieve her belongings and learned from Dee Hines' sister that he was chasing MacBook. She quickly drove after him, catching up at an intersection. Together, they pursued the con man in her car. Dee Hines' sister, ever the opportunist, took advantage of his instruction to hold on tight by firmly wrapping her arms around his waist. MacBook abandoned his car and fled up a staircase, hoping to lose them in the narrow alleyways, and he initially succeeded. But karma caught up with him. They circled around and encountered each other again at another intersection. Clutching the stolen money, he desperately ran, ignoring Seat Bile's pleas to stop. Reaching an abandoned building, he slipped through a gap in a metal gate, escaping before they could catch him. Life, it seemed, was unfair. Dee Hines had no choice but to take Seat Bile home. This time, understanding her plight, he spoke to her with genuine kindness. The next day, Seat Bile sought out a friend, asking him to use his entertainment industry connections to investigate the company where her younger sister was interning. Seat Bile wasn't trying to thwart her sister's dreams, but she feared she might be exploited. Being both a sister and a mother figure was a heavy burden. Meanwhile, Mina, now living in a shared house, faced bullying from senior residents. But her tolerance had its limits. Finally snapping, she dumped dirty laundry on the heads of the 3 orange-haired bullies and reported their behavior to management. No longer afraid, Mina was ready to teach these self-absorbed stars a lesson they wouldn't forget. However, to pursue her dreams, she had to endure. Today, Seat Bile was called to the convenience store headquarters to receive an award for highest sales in the entire chain. She encountered Yeonju there, who made her rivalry quite obvious. As Seat Bile accepted her award, the director deliberately mentioned attending a play with Yeonju the previous evening. Seat Bile recalled Dee Hines' mother mentioning he'd bought play tickets for his girlfriend, who couldn't make it. Now she realized he'd gone with someone else, a man. After the ceremony, Seat Bile, unable to contain her anger, confronted Yeonju. She knew Dee Hines loved Yeonju, and despite her own feelings for him, she was willing to step aside. However, she wouldn't allow anyone to disrespect or deceive him. Yeonju, seeing them as unequal, refused to offer a lengthy explanation. The director, leveraging his authority, pressured Seat Bile's merchandising partner to terminate their contract with her. Haunted by her moment of weakness with the director, Yeonju felt increasingly uneasy. She was tormented by happy memories with Dee Hines and suddenly realized she loved him. Perhaps they deserved another chance. With this thought, Yeonju abruptly left a meeting, ignoring the director's protests, and rushed to Dee Hines' store. Learning from his friend that he was exhausted and had gone home to sleep, she unhesitatingly went to his house. Mrs. Bong, thrilled to meet her son's girlfriend for the first time, warmly welcomed Yeonju inside. Unbeknownst to her, Dee Hines wasn't home but sleeping in the storage room. Hearing from his friend that Yeonju was at his house, he panicked and raced back. Not wanting Yeonju to encounter Seat Bile and risk a misunderstanding, he quickly tried to pull Yeonju outside. But it was too late. Seat Bile had returned. The two women locked eyes. Dee Hines, flustered, tried to usher Yeonju away, and Seat Bile also tried to avoid the situation. But Mrs. Bong, oblivious, cheerfully invited everyone to sit down for tea and cake. Mrs. Bong enthusiastically introduced Seat Bile as her son's employee, whom she treated like a daughter. She even declared that if Dee Hines opened another branch, she'd make Seat Bile the manager, leaving Dee Hines to silently plead with his mother to stop. She ignored him, scolding him instead. Yeonju, initially intending to reconcile, now felt betrayed and excused herself. Despite Dee Hines' attempts to explain that Seat Bile was only staying with him temporarily after being scammed, Yeonju refused to listen, once again abandoning him and taking a taxi home. At Yeonju's apartment, the director was waiting. But Yeonju, in a foul mood, refused to engage. He revealed that he'd informed her mother about her being emotionally entangled with a useless convenience store worker. Mrs. Choi, upon hearing this, seemed to have devised a plan to end the relationship. The next day, Dee Hines, summoning all his courage, went to Yeonju's house and introduced himself as her boyfriend. Mrs. Choi made it clear she didn't approve. Shortly after, Mrs. Bong received a call about a large insurance policy. Simultaneously, Mr. Bong was offered a lucrative chauffeur position for a wealthy family. Naturally, they quickly accepted these seemingly fortunate opportunities. Their benefactor was none other than Mrs. Choi, who intended to subtly humiliate Di-hein by having his parents work for her. The Bongs, unaware of her motives, gratefully viewed her as their savior. Back home, Mrs. Bong declared that a wave of good fortune had swept over their family. Not only were she and Mr. Bong blessed with new jobs, but Di-hein seemed to be experiencing good luck as well. A man had entered his store and suspiciously purchased a sausage. The following day, Di-hein received a complaint accusing his store of selling expired food. Upon checking the security footage, he discovered the suspicious customer had intentionally purchased the expired item to file a lawsuit and demand 3 million won in compensation. The incident was reported to headquarters, and the director deliberately assigned Yeon-ju to handle it. While she found it a nuisance, Seat-byeol took matters into her own hands. She had Dal-sik pose as a gangster and intimidate the customer. Dal-sik, a natural performer, played the role convincingly, even threatening to jump on the man's hospital bed, warning him against ever scamming a convenience store again. However, acknowledging their own fault for not discarding the expired product sooner, they agreed to reduce the compensation to 1 million won. But when Seat-byeol excitedly relayed this news to Di-hein, he refused to pay. He'd rather accept a penalty for not discarding expired goods than reward someone who used threats and feigned illness for personal gain. He contacted the Food Safety Inspection authorities himself, opting to receive an official fine instead of settling. He informed Seat-byeol that he had also reported the incident to the police, ensuring the man wouldn't attempt such a scheme again. This, he explained, was the best way for decent people to retaliate. He wanted to show Seat-byeol that problems should be handled through proper channels, not through violence or acquiescence. Meanwhile, Di-hein's friend, after gathering information, located the idol training facility where Mina was interning. He called Seat-byeol to reassure her that Mina had signed with a reputable company, easing her worries. That evening, he ventured out to find Seat-byeol for a chat, teasing her about the limitations on her freedom as a rising star. However, upon learning about her situation, he couldn't bear to see her both homeless and unemployed. So, he offered her a place to stay at his house. But no matter how fast they tried to be discreet, the press still managed to snap photos. Looking at the spacious house where Choi Cheolbo lived alone, Seat-byeol felt both happy for him and worried about her close friend. He was handsome, rich, a good cook specifically, good at making instant noodles, and, notably, had a crush on Seat-byeol. It's true that, for guys, the concept of a platonic female best friend doesn't really exist. He showed her a video of Mina's dance performance, making her immensely proud of her younger sister. But this close proximity also sent his heart racing. Meanwhile, after some time, Di-hein repeatedly texted Yeon-ju to apologize. She replied, agreeing to meet. They ate at a modest restaurant, but their moods were completely different. Di-hein felt comfortable there, and he tried to explain that Seat-byeol was just crashing at his place. But for Yeon-ju, the place felt beneath her, and she no longer cared about Di-hein's affairs. It wasn't about jealousy, but rather a realization that breaking up there and then was the most logical course of action. It would be a clean break, preventing her from needing him in the future, and thus avoiding painful reminders of their 3-year relationship. And so, with a simple, "we're not compatible," everything was over. Before Di-hein could fully process the reality of the situation, Yeon-ju got into her chairman's car and left. Di-hein's heart ached, but he couldn't cry. Yeon-ju had accepted the chairman's advances, and he, in turn, was satisfying her desires by elevating her to his affluent world. Di-hein didn't know what to do. He returned to the store, quietly saw his mother off, and then sat alone in a corner, nursing his heartbreak. He had always thought of Yeon-ju as a capable department head. He never realized until now that she was the daughter of the company's second-largest shareholder and engaged to the chairman's son. He was her family's chauffeur, and his mother was her mother's insurance agent. His 3 years of hopeful love ended in humiliation. In truth, Yeon-ju's mother had orchestrated the entire situation, hoping to shame Di-hein into leaving her daughter. Yeon-ju's marriage to the chairman's son was a political maneuver, but Yeon-ju felt that this life suited her. Di-hein's parents weren't having an easy time either. They finally realized that the woman they worked for looked down on their son. But for the sake of money, they had to bow and scrape before her. Mrs. Bong secretly tore up the heartfelt thank you letter she had written for her employer. She swallowed her bitterness and signed the large insurance contract, but her heart wasn't in it. Mr. Bong, standing before his son, had to lower his head to the woman who despised him. He couldn't do anything else. Di-hyun tried calling his father, wanting to tell him that he wasn't ashamed of his job or his father. But his father couldn't bring himself to answer the phone. Poverty can be truly terrifying. The father, heartbroken for his son, could only exact a small revenge by secretly turning on a sprinkler, soaking the woman as she stood in the garden. On his way home, he bought some spicy chicken feet to share with his wife over drinks. Although they didn't have much money, they were working hard to earn a living. There was no shame in that. But what about the rich? The struggles of the poor meant nothing to them. And so, the couple drank and wept for themselves and their son. That morning, Seat-Bile was sleeping soundly when Choi Cheol-bo's manager kicked her out, fearing she would damage the rising star's reputation. Unexpectedly, when Di-hyun learned about this, he didn't hesitate to invite her back to his place. He was always that kind, even though life wasn't easy for him. Mrs. Bong was also very kind to Seat-Bile, moving her to tears. Knowing how Yeonju's family looked down on his parents, Di-hyun had let go of his feelings for her, but the resentment lingered. He sat by the seashore, wondering if leaving his corporate job years ago to pursue his passion for running a convenience store had been a mistake. At the convenience store, Seat-Bile learns from the gossipy grapevine that Di-hyun has broken up with his girlfriend. Overjoyed, she uses her newly purchased heating pad as leverage to somehow obtain his current location. It's a small world indeed, as Hyun-jae and Dan-sik are unaware they are each other's online sweethearts. This leads to Hyun-jae coming to the store looking for Seat-Bile, but instead encountering and clashing with Dan-sik. When he tries to stop her from leaving, she kicks him in the groin. From then on, they become sworn enemies. Later that evening, a dejected Di-hyun is drinking beer by the beach when Seat-Bile appears like a shining star. She snatches his beer and acts silly, all in an attempt to make him laugh. Meanwhile, Choi Young-pil aka Chicken Bone, exhausted after a long day of performing, is eager to see Seat-Bile. However, his manager throws cold water on his hopes, revealing that he has fired her. Jacob is furious but powerless. The disappointed manager returns to his room, immersing himself in darkness and loneliness. Unrequited love is truly painful. As for Seat-Bile, she's forced to listen to a drunken Di-hyun lamenting his lost love, which is equally painful. He drinks himself into unconsciousness, leaving her to carry him home. It turns out Seat-Bile has had a crush on Di-hyun for 10 years. Back then, when she was training in martial arts with Jacob, Di-hyun had saved her from being used as a punching bag. His worried expression captivated her, and she's loved him ever since. Ironically, in his eyes, she's a little devil who hates him and could have him jailed at any moment. This is understandable, as the very next morning, she draws, "I belong to Seat-Bile" on his face, nearly giving him a heart attack when he sees his reflection. Seat-Bile cheerfully returns to work at the convenience store, despite having been fired. After a lonely night, Jacob rushes to the store to find her, and seeing her toiling makes his heart ache. A little later, Di-hyun arrives and confronts Seat-Bile about the difficult-to-remove ink on his face. Seeing their closeness, Jacob can't bear it and quietly slips away. He wishes she would treat him the same way. Di-hyun may act tough, but he's been wanting Seat-Bile back at work for a long time. He's even prepared a new name tag and taken care of her work insurance. The two of them happily sit outside the store, eating snacks. Noticing he's changed his phone wallpaper, she can't hide her joy and confidently suggests there's a beautiful girl waiting for him to love her, almost choking Di-hyun in the process. He'll never know how long she's secretly admired him since she first saw him open the store. She braved the cold and drizzle, quietly watching him work diligently from afar. She was overjoyed when she saw the job posting. Now, seeing Seat-Bile's bright, playful smile, Di-hyun finds himself smiling back. He even presents her with a new uniform to celebrate her becoming a full-time employee. It's a matching pair, which delights her. Seeing her up close, he suddenly finds her adorable. Di-hyun's eyes wander, and his words become stammering, forcing him to step outside. Peeking back inside to see her acting silly, he finds himself amused rather than annoyed. Yeonju has been promoted. Her first project is a promotional campaign for the convenience store chain. Initially, she chooses Jacob as the model and plans to film at a different store. However, Jacob insists on filming the commercial at the store where Seat Bile works. To prove she was over the past, Yeonju agreed. Arriving at the store first, she stumbled upon Dee-hein and Seat Bile taking cozy pictures together. She tried to steer the conversation towards work, but Dee-hein's attention remained solely on Seat Bile. He even seemed flustered when he realized Yeonju was jealous. Now, every word Dee-hein spoke treated Yeonju like a stranger. He even said he'd discuss the matter with Seat Bile before making a decision, which made Seat Bile incredibly happy. Although not in love with him anymore, Yeonju still left feeling annoyed. Seat Bile suspected Dee-hein was only using her to upset Yeonju, but he insisted he no longer had feelings for his ex. He gave Seat Bile full decision-making power, claiming Jacob chose this location specifically for her. Meanwhile, the mermaid and pearl couple, after some time texting, decided to meet in person. They agreed to hold flowers and stand at opposite ends of a traffic light. He styled his hair meticulously, while she sprayed perfume liberally around her room, vowing to love him even if he was ugly. Dan Sixh, dressed in a smart suit and holding a small rose, nervously went to meet his online love. He'd been worried his texting partner was a man, making him sweat profusely. Luckily, it wasn't, though he was startled when Hyun-jae appeared. Upon seeing each other, they both quickly hid their flowers. Before even facing each other, they muttered insults under their breath. Both thought they must have chosen a bad day to go out, encountering the person they hated most. They brushed past each other in a continuous, silent rivalry. Finally, as the light turned green again, they walked towards each other. They couldn't believe they were falling for the person they despised. Suddenly, a motorcycle sped towards them. Dan Sixh quickly grabbed Hyun-jae's hair, pulling her away from the vehicle and into his arms. It was a romantic scene, but Hyun-jae, suffering a momentary shock, punched Dan Sixh in the nose, causing a nosebleed and temporary unconsciousness for him. She ran away, while he knelt on the ground, wiping bird droppings off his face and cursing his luck for encountering such a monster. Seat Bile and Dee-hein decided to film a commercial at their store. They both looked serious while cleaning and tidying up, but they kept exchanging glances, flirting, and laughing. They just can't seem to be apart, can they? The next day, the filming crew arrived. Seat Bile and Dee-hein, notably wearing matching couple outfits, greeted them. Seat Bile, besides being beautiful, also has a sharp wit, and she directly teased the director, much to his annoyance. Seat Bile, noticing his discomfort, offered him some herbal candy to cool down, and subtly pointed out that his foundation was caking. Dee-hein, embarrassed by his makeup mishap, it was his first time, after all, wanted to hide. He rushed to the back room to wipe his face. However, when he came back out, he saw Seat Bile scolding Jae-wook, seemingly defending Dee-hein, which warmed his heart. But then she teased him about being old and having wrinkles, suggesting he should keep his bangs down to hide them. Dee-hein's warm feelings quickly evaporated. Jae-wook, meanwhile, took the scolding without much reaction. Is being handsome a crime? To prove his handsomeness to Seat Bile, Dee-hein dramatically swept his bangs back. He really was handsome. The filming was going smoothly, but the manager suddenly stopped it. Dee-hein was featuring beef intestines from a small, local restaurant in the commercial. He and Seat Bile thought it was delicious, especially mixed with noodles, and wanted to recommend it to everyone. But the manager thought Dee-hein was just putting on a show of being down to earth and genuine. This truly angered Dee-hein. He didn't hold back and told the manager straight up that he was the manager of this branch. Seeing Dee-hein being mistreated, Seat Bile also got fired up and gave the fussy manager a piece of her mind. The beef intestine place wasn't paying for the advertisement, but if it's delicious, what's wrong with recommending it? The embarrassed manager called Yeonju to handle the situation. While expecting Seat Bile to be reprimanded, Dee-hein instead praised her work, immediately calming her anger. They sold food because they wanted to bring delicious meals to everyone. Not only that, but Dee-hein also regularly gave free food to an orphan boy. This act helped Seat Bile understand why she loved him. Yeonju arrived and demanded her subordinate apologize to Dee-hein. As he was about to bow, Seat Bile stopped him, arguing they hadn't done anything wrong. She pulled him into the storage room and taught him a lesson about not being submissive. Dee-hein was a receptive student. This is what they call being whipped. She declared herself his guardian angel. linked arms with him, and he immediately smiled and agreed. Seat-Bile was supposed to work the night shift, but upon hearing Jacob would be working with her, D-Hein immediately changed his mind. "If he's in, I'm in. No way am I leaving you two alone," he declared. Seat-Bile, oblivious to the underlying tension, cheerfully bid them good night and went to bed. The next morning, Jacob's convenience store event concluded successfully. Yeonju was there to offer congratulations. She and D-Hein, now free of any lingering awkwardness, interacted purely as business acquaintances. D-Hein was furious when he learned Seat-Bile would be accompanying Jacob to his sister's debut. However, Jacob received a last-minute call for voice-over work, forcing him to cancel his plans with Seat-Bile. This brought a visible smile to D-Hein's face. His feelings were changing rapidly. He realized he was falling for his young employee. Seat-Bile stood among the crowd, watching her sister receive cheers from adoring fans. As an older sister and maternal figure, she couldn't hide her pride. Mina, looking at her sister, felt a surge of indescribable emotion. She mouthed a heartfelt thank you to Seat-Bile. During her performance, Mina tripped and suffered a nosebleed, but she bravely stood up and continued to dance. Everyone makes mistakes, especially in the beginning. This incident quickly transformed Mina into a resilient figure in the eyes of her fans, and her following grew significantly. Seat-Bile returned home, slightly disappointed that she hadn't been able to get a ticket to her sister's concert. When she received a video from a friend, she was overjoyed to see Mina shine, worried when she saw her fall, and proud of her resilience in facing the setback. The roller coaster of emotions made Seat-Bile realize how much Mina had grown. Mina called to thank her sister, and both were moved to tears. From now on, each would have her own life, but they would never forget each other. Unable to give the flowers to her sister, Seat-Bile decided to give them to someone special. D-Hein. Looking at the bouquet and Seat-Bile's smile, his heart skipped a beat. In that moment, he realized he had fallen for her. Things were going well for Mina, but her past was catching up to her. A group of former bullies, who had exploited her by forcing her to sing for money and taking compromising photos, were now threatening her burgeoning career. They demanded half of her earnings, promising to ruin her if she refused. However, Mina was still a trainee with no income. Knowing she was close to the star Jae-wook, the red-haired bully pressured her to arrange a meeting with him. With no other option, Mina reached out to Jae-wook for help. This directly impacted Jacob's, presumably Jae-wook's, real-name career, but he had promised Seat-Bile he'd protect her younger sister, so he risked it and accompanied Mina to the bar to meet the bullies. He even gave them his autograph. While they pretended to be huge fans of Jae-wook, they secretly took pictures of him comforting Mina, planning to blackmail them both or destroy their careers. When Mina visited her sister, Seat-Bile, she received photos of herself bullying others in a karaoke bar. It was clear that the bullies had forced her to do those things and were now using the photos to blackmail Seat-Bile. Seat-Bile was extremely worried when she learned her sister was being threatened, but Mina stubbornly refused to confide in her. Just when Seat-Bile was wondering what to do next, she received a big surprise from D-Hein. He had converted the storage room into a study space and promised to help her continue her high school education if she wished. Touched, Seat-Bile hugged him tightly in gratitude, taking him by surprise. He had sacrificed so much for his previous girlfriend, but had never received such genuine appreciation. Now, a small gesture had brought Seat-Bile so much joy. He realized that only someone who truly loved him would appreciate his efforts. He hugged her back and promised to help her graduate from high school. As for Yeonju, she thought she had gotten over D-Hein. But now, when a colleague mentioned him, she instinctively revisited his resignation file. She stumbled upon a shocking secret. He had taken the blame for her. Yeonju rushed to find his former manager for clarification. Finally, she learned that years ago, the failed project she had been in charge of had been pinned on D-Hein to protect her image. Out of love for her, he had willingly accepted all the blame and left the company, choosing to manage a convenience store. Yeonju ran to find him, embracing him and apologizing profusely. This scene was inadvertently witnessed by Seat-Bile. D-Hein, flustered, pushed Yeonju away, saying he didn't want to dwell on the past. He also refused Yeonju's offer to help him return to the company, because now he had someone else in his life. With that, D. Hein hurried inside to find Seat Bile. However, today, Seat Bile wasn't her usual bright and enthusiastic self with him, leaving him utterly disappointed. As for Seat Bile, it wasn't until she got home that she fully unleashed her pent-up anger. In an attempt to smooth things over, D. Hein asked Dan Sick to stand outside and sing. He then sat in Seat Bile's usual spot, only to realize that she had overheard everything. Seat Bile was jealous. Meanwhile, Dan Sick continued his cover performance, but his thoughts were consumed by Hein J. Seat Bile went to her younger sister's agency, hoping her manager could help resolve an issue with Mina's past photos surfacing. But Mina disagreed with her sister's approach, fearing she'd be fired. She dragged Seat Bile outside, where they were photographed by a reporter and encountered a group of bullies. Seat Bile told Mina to go inside while she confronted the bullies in a secluded spot. They were holding compromising photos of Mina, leaving Seat Bile unable to fight back and forced to endure a beating, all while the reporter documented the scene. Seat Bile struggled to call a friend for a ride. Jung Sik, the blonde-haired friend, took her back to the convenience store. D. Hein recognized the seriousness of the situation, deeply worried, and repeatedly asked Seat Bile what had happened. She tried to hide it, claiming she just fell down the stairs, but Jung Sik couldn't keep quiet and revealed the truth. D. Hein tenderly treated Seat Bile's wounds, comforting her and telling her not to blame herself. He reassured her that she was a wonderful older sister to Mina, which brought Seat Bile to tears, and she leaned on him for support. Around the same time, the Pearl Mermaid couple from the rhythm game found themselves drawn together by fate, unable to avoid each other. They were both regulars at the arcade, and both happened to be top-tier players. Teaming up, they achieved the highest score ever recorded on the game. Their chemistry was undeniable. They celebrated with beers, lamenting the irony of fate bringing them together, only to wake up the next morning in the same bed, realizing they'd drunkenly carried each other home. Hein Jai, embarrassed, quickly left. Dal Sik watched her go from his upstairs window. Feeling a pang in his chest, he was definitely smitten. Meanwhile, Yeonju remained determined to help D. Hein reclaim what he'd lost, even though he'd rejected her assistance. She used the popularity of a program featuring the company's convenience store chain as a pretext to arrange a dinner between D. Hein and the chairman, hoping to improve D. Hein's standing within the company. She even had D. Hein's former manager personally invite him, ensuring he wouldn't refuse. Mrs. Bong, thrilled that her son was invited to dine with the chairman, urged him to attend. D. Hein, unable to disobey his mother, went to the dinner, which also included Director Choi and Yeonju. The chairman presented D. Hein with a gold key, symbolizing a new opportunity, much to Director Choi's displeasure. After the dinner, D. Hein showed the gold key to his mother, who promptly confiscated it. Not content with just the gold, she also confiscated Seat Bile's presents, leaving D. Hein devastated and collapsing to the floor. Later, Yeonju informed Seat Bile that the chairman had appointed D. Hein as an advisor at headquarters, representing all branch managers. However, D. Hein declined the offer, feeling he lacked the necessary experience. Undeterred, Yeonju approached Mrs. Bong, urging her to persuade D. Hein to accept the high-paying position. Despite her lingering resentment towards Yeonju's family and their perceived condescension, Mrs. Bong agreed to talk to her son. At the same time, the police visited D. Hein's store, requesting security footage to apprehend a criminal. While Seat Bile was simply chatting with the officers, the bullies happened to pass by and mistakenly believed she was reporting them. Seeking revenge, they posted Mina and Jacob's photos online. Overnight, the news of Jacob's girlfriend, Mina, being a bully went viral. Mina's manager also discovered that she had hired her mother to trick her into signing the internship contract. Jacob's manager forbade him from going out or contacting anyone. Seat Bile was working at the store when she learned about the online scandal involving her sister and her friend through student videos. She panicked, overwhelmed with worry, blaming herself for Mina's predicament. D. Hein, upon seeing the video, immediately rushed to the store to find her. He found her huddled in the storage room, distraught and feeling utterly helpless. She questioned whether she was the one who had caused all of this to happen to her sister. D. Hein embraced the petite woman, understanding her struggles and assuring her of his unwavering support, encouragement, and trust. After careful consideration, Seat Bile decided to take matters into her own hands rather than involving the police. She wanted to teach the bullies a lesson herself. She tracked them down to their lair. The two ringleaders came at her with their cobra tail fighting style, while Seat Bile countered with taekwondo. "A few moves from me and the snake loses its head. Come on, show me what you've got," she taunted, referring to their writhing, worm-like fighting technique. They might have looked intimidating, but Seat Bile, a black belt, could easily handle them. As for the remaining three girls, two of them pushed the redhead forward, right into Seat Bile's fist, knocking her unconscious. The blonde, wisely surrendering, retrieved the redhead's phone and handed it over. They even bowed politely before leaving. Seat Bile entrusted the phone to the reporter known for her truthful journalism. Next, Seat Bile went looking for her sister. Mina had left the agency, but Seat Bile knew where to find her. After all, she was her sister. Upon seeing Seat Bile, Mina burst into tears. Seat Bile hugged her sister, comforting her and promising they would face everything together. The two sisters walked hand in hand through the night, arriving at Mrs. Bong's house. Despite having read the news online, Mrs. Bong showed unwavering faith in the girls' character, welcoming them in for a warm meal with motherly compassion. This gesture moved Seat Bile to tears. Meanwhile, the reporter, back home, examined the contents of the redhead's phone and discovered that Mina had been coerced. She wrote an article exposing the truth and defending the wronged girl. When Mina and Seat Bile read the article, they embraced each other joyfully, realizing they had support from unexpected places, people who cared for them like family. Dee Hein smiled, impressed by Seat Bile's way of handling the situation. Her personality, her smile, and her fierce protectiveness of her sister had captured his heart. He also remembered training at Seat Bile's father's martial arts studio. Seat Bile encouraged Dee Hein to return to the company and excel in his work, offering to take over the convenience store. With her support, Dee Hein confidently returned to his corporate job, thanking Yeonju for the opportunity. He understood she was trying to make amends for the past, just as he had protected her back then. Dee Hein had once loved Yeonju deeply, and despite their breakup, he harbored no regrets. At the convenience store, Jacob came to say a final goodbye to Seat Bile before leaving the country for work. He accepted that letting go of their romantic relationship was the best choice for both of them, choosing to preserve their friendship instead. Seat Bile hugged him goodbye, teasing him playfully and reaffirming their enduring bond, despite the distance. After his first day back at work, Dee Hein bought flowers for Seat Bile, marking the beginning of their sweet romance. Yeonju happened to witness this scene, leaving her frustrated and heartbroken at the loss of something precious. Later, while dining with her mother, Yeonju revealed that director Choi had been the one who blamed Dee Hein for her mistake years ago, forcing him to resign. She declared her refusal to marry him and her intention to win Dee Hein back, even threatening to sever ties with her mother if she interfered. However, Dee Hein's heart now belonged entirely to Seat Bile, leaving no room for Yeonju. Dee Hein spent his days working and his evenings tutoring Seat Bile, only to realize he was the one who needed the lessons. She was remarkably intelligent. While Dee Hein was at work, Seat Bile would subtly sniff his shirt, noticing he no longer wore the cologne his ex-girlfriend had given him. She went online to buy him a new scent. As she waited for the delivery, Mina's intern manager contacted her. Mina, relaxing at home with a cucumber mask and Mr. Bong, received a call from her sister and rushed to the convenience store. The manager offered Mina a second chance to pursue her passion, bringing the grateful girl to tears. Seat Bile held her sister's hand, confident in Mina's ability to succeed. The three members of Fancy also arrived to welcome Mina back, reassuring Seat Bile that her sister was in good hands. At the company, Director Choi deliberately assigned Dee Hein a difficult task, persuading the company's oldest store owner to renew his contract, as he was planning to switch to a different franchise the following month. Yeonju, aware of the director's intentions, accompanied Dee Hein to the store. As expected, the elderly owner threw them out after Dee Hein fell while catching Yeonju. Though uninjured, Yeonju insisted he go to the hospital. Dee Hein, however, refused her concern. Realizing he'd left his briefcase at the store, he returned, ignoring Yeonju. The owner happened to be stepping out, so Dee Hein offered to help out in the store. While manning the store, he quizzed Seat Bile over the phone like a true teacher, marking her answers right or wrong. Despite her passing grade, D-Hein pushed her to aim higher, even suggesting she pursue a college degree, offering to cover all expenses. That evening, after work, D-Hein brought Seat Bile rice cakes, and despite his exhaustion, reminded her to study for her exam the next day, assuring her he'd take care of the store. Meanwhile, the Pearl Mermaid couple's relationship blossomed. Facing writer's block, Dal-Sik found inspiration in Hyun Jae's suggestions. Their creative synergy was undeniable, leading them to realize they were a perfect match and embark on a romantic relationship. From mutual dislike, they had become inseparable. Seat Bile, after getting ready and buying a new cologne for D-Hein, returned to the store only to find him collapsed from exhaustion behind the counter. She rushed him to the hospital. Mrs. Bong, concerned about D-Hein overworking himself, suggested closing the convenience store. She and Mr. Bong reassured Seat Bile, urging her to rest and focus on her exam. Later that night, D-Hein woke up and immediately called Seat Bile to ease her worries. Thanks to that, she was able to confidently ace her exam the next day. After finishing, she rushed straight to the hospital and ran into Yeonju there. Yeonju informed Seat Bile that the convenience store would be handed over to corporate management. "I can't stand to see D-Hein burdened with so much," she said, implying that Seat Bile was useless and couldn't contribute to his work. However, when they both went to visit D-Hein, he had just woken up and his eyes only sought out Seat Bile, repeatedly asking her how her exam went. It took him a while to even notice Yeonju's presence, leaving her disappointed and prompting her to leave. Back home, Mrs. Bong advised her son to give up the convenience store and focus on his corporate job, but he firmly refused. The next morning, he frankly told Yeonju, "If I have to choose between the two, I'd gladly give up my office job. Managing a convenience store was my dream from the beginning, not something I ended up doing because I was taking the blame for you." This still didn't get through to Yeonju. Her goal of getting D-Hein back to the corporate world had now shifted to separating him from Seat Bile. So, she secretly met with manager Go-Sai, the manager at D-Hein's store, to devise a plan to get rid of Seat Bile. If successful, she promised to bring him back to the corporate office and give him a promotion. But before this plan could be put into action, D-Hein mustered up the courage to confess his feelings to Seat Bile. He prepared an especially romantic setting and the most beautiful bouquet for the woman he loved. "When I met you 3 years ago, my heart skipped a beat. Meeting you again 3 years later, I believe it's destiny. You've always waited for me, so let me give you a proper title." This was what Seat Bile had been longing for, and now that it had come true, her eyes welled up with emotion. However, she didn't immediately agree. She said she'd give him her answer after she got her graduation exam results, as she wanted to be the best version of herself before she was truly worthy of him. D-Hein chuckled. "I like you no matter what. But if that's what you want, then I'll wait." That evening, despite living in the same house but different rooms, they texted each other to meet downstairs for ramen. However, upon arriving, they found Mrs. Bong was also awake, so the three of them ended up having an impromptu dance party. D-Hein and Seat Bile hadn't yet revealed their relationship to his mother, so they abandoned their ramen plans and returned to their rooms to continue texting, basking in their newfound happiness. However, their days of cohabiting like this were coming to an end. The police had caught the con artist and were preparing to return the deposits to Seat Bile and the other victims. She didn't know how to tell D-Hein, wondering if she'd simply have to move out. He was pondering this very issue when he came to her room, carrying a huge pizza. While they ate, he told her that Manager Go would soon be managing the store. "If he gives you any trouble, tell me and I'll deal with him." Not only was Manager Go making decisions about the store, but he was also actively trying to win over Mrs. Bong, gifting her a luxurious burgundy crocodile leather bag and even taking her out for drinks and escorting her home. All of this was an effort to win back D-Hein's favor. To thank Yeonju for driving her home, Mrs. Bong insisted her son take Yeonju out for a meal. "Thank her for me." D-Hein already had plans to have dinner with Seat Bile that night, but being understanding, she encouraged him to obey his mother. So, D-Hein ended up having dinner with his ex-girlfriend. Yeonju used this opportunity to suggest they get back together, but D-Hein immediately refused. "I loved you with all my heart for 3 years, but now that it's over, I have no regrets and won't look back. Besides, we have nothing in common and live in completely different worlds. It's best we remain colleagues. After dinner, D-Hein returned to the store and dramatically sprayed himself with disinfectant to eradicate the ex-girlfriend virus, making Seat Bile laugh. "Why are you back so early?" she asked. "Because I missed you," he replied. "Now, let's go home." Mrs. Bong, still unaware of her son's feelings for Seat Bile and believing he's still deeply in love with Yeonju, advises him, forgive her and get back together with her. This leaves D-Hein bewildered and Seat Bile deeply hurt. Aware of her perceived inferiority to Yeonju, unable to gift Mrs. Bong designer bags or help D-Hein's career, she retreats to her room. D-Hein is at a loss for words with his mother. She constantly pushes him to conform for an easier life without considering his desires. Moreover, her actions are hurting the woman he truly loves. For the first time, D-Hein raises his voice at his mother. Seat Bile, eavesdropping on the stairs, is unsure what to do. She even starts to think Mrs. Bong is right. Maybe only with Yeonju will D-Hein and his family's lives be less difficult. Seat Bile feels awkward at home and faces increasing pressure at the store. The new manager throws out all her stored furniture and study materials. He even brings in Deputy Manager Gong Hee, a Muay Thai and Kendo practitioner, to challenge Seat Bile. Gong Hee's attempt at intimidation backfires when Seat Bile easily breaks his hand in a handshake, foreshadowing his inevitable defeat. It looks like life at the convenience store is about to get a lot more dramatic. With D-Hein no longer managing the store, the place feels unfamiliar to Seat Bile. She also loses confidence in pursuing her feelings for him. Hearing Mrs. Bong lament about her son's struggles further fuels Seat Bile's insecurities and makes her question her worthiness. Should she step aside and let him go back to Yeonju? That night, after sharing a nice meal with D-Hein, she quietly packs her bag, thanks each family member, and leaves the warmth of their home. That night, D-Hein has a nightmare where she, as the convenience store manager version of herself, leaves him, the corporate team leader version of himself, behind. He rushes to her room early the next morning, only to find it empty, save for a farewell letter and a gift on the bed. Seat Bile explains she retrieved her housing deposit and will use it to pursue her dreams. She urges him to do what's best for himself and live well. D-Hein refuses to accept this. He rushes to the police station, asking the officer if Seat Bile mentioned her destination when retrieving her deposit, but the officer has no information. Now it's D-Hein's turn to feel lonely. He looks at the store he painstakingly built, now managed by someone else, devoid of Seat Bile's energetic presence, and feels utterly lost. Seat Bile has returned to the countryside to work at a flower garden. Her strength allows her to effortlessly carry 2 heavy pots of soil at once. Moreover, she loves flowers, making it an ideal job. That evening, she witnesses Jin Tae, the flower garden owner's son, being extorted by classmates and steps in to teach the 2 bullies a lesson. Knowing they need their hands for writing, she refrains from breaking them, instead retrieving the stolen money and warning them against future bullying. However, fearing retaliation, a terrified Jin Tae scolds Seat Bile for interfering and runs after the bullies to apologize, leaving her bewildered. D-Hein calls, but she refuses to speak to him, believing their connection has ended. Then, unexpectedly, Dal-sik and Hyun-jae spot her. Surprisingly, Dal-sik is the flower garden owner's son and the owner of the vast land surrounding it. He brings Hyun-jae home to meet his father, inadvertently leading to Seat Bile's discovery. He immediately calls D-Hein with her location. Upon receiving the news, D-Hein rushes to the countryside. Seat Bile is shocked to see him. Before she can recover from her surprise, the kid from the previous day's altercation arrives with his older brother seeking revenge. D-Hein tries to reason with them, advising them to value their well-being, but they dismiss Seat Bile as a weak city dweller. This time, D-Hein won't let Seat Bile fight. He, too, trained at her father's martial arts school, so now it's his turn to protect her. He skillfully dodges and counters the older brother's attacks, winning the first round. However, in the second round, he's knocked unconscious against a tangerine tree. This truly enraged Seat Bile. "You dare hit my boyfriend? I'll plant each of you face first in the ground." She swiftly subdues the older brother, forcing him to beg for mercy. By the time they flee, D-Hein regains consciousness, conveniently timed, contrasting with his earlier frantic arrival. Now, he gently tells Seat Bile he respects her decisions. If this is where she wants to be, he won't bother her with calls. But he promises to always reply to her texts and wait until she's ready to return to Seoul. Di-hein went to Yeonju to resign. He thanked her for trying to help him reach greater heights, but explained that the frequency there wasn't right for him. At that moment, Yeonju understood. She had officially lost Di-hein. That evening, she confided in her mother about her desire to return to America to challenge herself. Mrs. Choi still couldn't understand her daughter's feelings, assuming Yeonju was heartbroken over Di-hein, and so she went to see Mrs. Bong again to exert pressure. This time, Mrs. Bong lost her patience. She shouted at Mrs. Choi, "My goodness, you're a terribly selfish mother. That's why your daughter's life is so difficult. It's her life, but you keep forcing her to live the way you want. Do you know what I'm most ashamed of right now? It's making my son marry into a rich family." Thanks to his parents' support, Di-hein returned to his familiar role, diligently managing the convenience store. Every day, he meticulously cleaned Seat Bile's study table, waiting for her return. Today, while working, Seat Bile received the joyful news that she had passed her graduation exam. Going to college was something she had been worried about, wanting to be worthy of Di-hein. However, her diploma was sent to Di-hein's address, so that evening, Seat Bile had to risk returning to retrieve it. Before she could find it, Mr. and Mrs. Bong had already picked it up. Mrs. Bong was incredibly proud of Seat Bile. Seat Bile tried to hide, but eventually, they spotted her. Reunited with the woman she considered a mother, Seat Bile couldn't hold back her tears, and Mrs. Bong's eyes welled up too. She begged Seat Bile to stay. Seat Bile promised she wouldn't leave again. Di-hein had been working non-stop for 40 hours and was in a drowsy, dreamlike state. Just then, Seat Bile marched confidently down the street toward the store. The situation was identical to their first encounter. She was there to apply for a job again. She had to pinch Di-hein's cheek to convince him he wasn't dreaming. They embraced tightly, making up for lost time, promising never to be apart again. It just goes to show how wonderful it is to live and love the things you cherish, in your own way. Everyone born into this world should live like fireworks. Even though they'll fade away, they once burned brightest.